Zach Harris here, Fox Sports 980 and 95.9 FM for the love of sports, Sundays at 11 a.m. on Fox Sports 980 and 95.9 FM. We don't have college football game day coming here in Latham, New York, or the capital region, but I did want to break down a premier game of the weekend between number 2 LSU and number 3 Alabama. You take a look at the college football playoff rankings, and the top 4 go as followed on precedent. Ohio State number 1, LSU number 2, Alabama number 3, and Penn State number 4. Obviously, it's the first ranking of the year for the College Football Playoff Committee. It usually never stays the same, including the fact that we have number 2 LSU playing number 3 Alabama. So that's why I wanted to give you a little preview of the game. Over the last 10 or so years, this has been one of the predominant matchups that you've been looking forward to. And you know what? It's been often a defensive matchup between these two teams, lying heavily on the run game between Derrick Henry and Leonard Fournette and all the other running backs that have come through Alabama and LSU. And then you take a look at the defense where you have a lot of premier players from both teams getting drafted in the NFL over the last 10 years. You get the Patrick Petersons of the world. You get the Eddie Jacksons, the Ha Clinton Dix, the Minka Fitzpatricks. The list goes on. So not only do they have the OBJs, the Jarvis Landrys, but they have the Julio Jones and the Calvin Ridleys of the world. Well, this year's matchup is different from years gone by. We have 2 potential Heisman candidates, including last year's Heisman finalist Tua Tagovailoa, starting quarterback for Alabama, going against a Heisman hopeful in Joe Burrows for this LSU team, a team that has been lacking offensive success for as long as we could remember over the last 10 years. Alabama just recently finding offensive success in the last few years with Tua Tagovailoa, and before that, Jalen Hurts, going more for a RPO running/passing game instead of relying heavily on the run team and heavily on your defense. So let's get into a breakdown a little bit right now of these two teams. So we're talking a lot offensively about these two teams. So what are the kind of stats and figures that kind of stick out about this game? Well, you take a look at the Alabama run game. You have Brian Robertson, and you also have Najee Harris, who once was considered one of the top running backs in his class going to Alabama. I think Cam Sims just ranked ahead of him in some other prospect forms. But you take a look at this Alabama run game, and this game is as efficient as it's ever been. But the problem is that they don't often get big yardage. They don't get chunk yardage. In fact, if you take a look at Brian Robinson and Najee Harris, they've combined for 184-yard carries, but only 4 of those carries have gone for 20-plus yards. So while they've been physical and dominant, they haven't been able to break off those big runs. And then you take a look at the passing game that's been on precedent. You take a look at probably, you know what? They are the best receiving corps in college football and in recent memory of college football. They have a foursome of Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, and Henry Ruggs III, and you can't forget about the sophomore, Jalen Waddle. They've combined for over 2,000 receiving yards and 24 touchdowns. And these guys have big play capabilities. They could take a 5-yard screen and take it to the house at any moment. But LSU's quarterback and wide receiver core isn't lacking either. While they aren't the strength that Alabama's receiving core is, they have some dominant players on that side as well. You have Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, as well as Terrence Marshall Jr. These are some very capable of receivers that, you take a look at the deep threat, Jamar Chase, who's averaging over 17 yards a catch, and then you take a look at the Alabama side where, yeah, they can make explosive plays as well. But I think Alabama's wide receivers are a little bit more explosive and can do more in space. But the problem lies within the 30 yards of the end zone. Often this Alabama team gets a little too cute within 30 yards of the end zone and don't have as much success as they would between the 20s. So when they get within 30 yards of the end zone, you've seen last year in the title game against Clemson, they came up empty-handed more times than not. They had 6 drives within the Clemson 30-yard line of the end zone and managed only 16 points. That went a long way in Clemson's blowout. But talking about this year, they definitely seem to get more of the bubble screens involved. In fact, if you take a look at them, Tua Tagovailoa has 29% of his passes this season behind the line of scrimmage, but those passes have gone for a really good, effective 8.5 yards per attempt. So when you're throwing the ball behind the line of scrimmage, that's good blocking, and that's elusiveness that you see in this wide receiver core. You take a look at Joe Burrow's, he's only thrown 13% of his passes behind the line of scrimmage, and they're only averaging a measly 5.6 yards per pass play behind the line of scrimmage with a 141.9 rating compared to Tua's 191.7 rating. So that just kind of shows you the explosiveness in Alabama's receiving core. So this is going to be a tough matchup defensively for LSU. A lot of it's going to fall on the true freshman Derek Stingley and also junior safety Grant Delpit. You take a look at Delpit, he just practiced for the first time on Thursday, coming off an ankle sprain. And to be honest with you guys, this guy's not very good in coverage. The best thing he could do, instead of man-on-man coverage, sit there like a safety does, play the field, sit back, analyze the field, and make plays from where he stands, not being up towards the line of scrimmage, guarding a man one-on-one. And when you have 4 receivers that can take the ball to the house at any moment, it's going to have to push him up against the line and possibly cover some guys one-on-one. Maybe it's Jalen Waddle. Maybe it's Devontae Smith. Who knows? But if Alabama can get him up on man-to-man coverage, they can exploit that weakness right there and also try to go after the freshman in Derek Stingley and see if he's going to hold up. Then you take a look at LSU side, and they got their work cut out for them as well. You got Trevon Diggs, who made the conversion to cornerback. He's a senior, so he brings that swagger and experience. Then you have, senior Shaheim Carter, who's been a welcomed surprise for Alabama. And a lot of it's going to fall on the 2 safeties. You got Xavier McKinney and Jared Maiden, who oftentimes have made their mistakes back in the secondary, and teams have been able to exploit it. This defense for Alabama is not as well equipped as it has been in years past due to multiple injuries in the linebacker position, but they're still able to get after the quarterback. They have about 20 sacks on the season, and they've been able to force turnovers. They had 10 interceptions and 2 taken to the house. You've seen Trevon Diggs recover a fumble and take it 100 yards the other game. This team can create turnovers. Ultimately, I think this is going to come down to who can make the most plays on the defensive side of the ball and who can make the most plays on the offensive side of the ball. But ultimately, I think Alabama's run game is going to be too physical for this LSU line. And I think it's going to open up some lanes for these playmakers on these slant routes between Devontae Smith, who's dealing with a shoulder injury, and also Jerry Jeudy, who looks like one of the top wide receiver prospects this year going into the NFL, possibly next year. And then, on the LSU side of the ball, Joe Burrow has to protect the ball. He's got to continue to do what he has to get this far and continue to do it the way he has this far, working with a new offensive coordinator, absolutely dominating to this point in the year. Like I said, this is not the Alabama defense of old, but I think their run game's too physical. I think Brian Roberts is a underrated running back. He's very physical. He always seems to fall forward. And Najee Harris has the ability to be elusive and break out of tackles. So between those two, I think they're going to control the offensive line. They're going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to open up lanes for their playmakers on the outside. My X factor for this game is Jalen Waddle, a return man for Alabama. He averages best in the league, over 20 yards per return. So that's a big thing to look out for. If Alabama can get good starting position, it's only going to help their scoring cause. And this is a game that's not going to rely on their defense as much as their offense, but it's ultimately going to come down to, in the trenches, who can get the most stops. Who am I taking for this game? I'm going Alabama by 6 points. It's going to come down to the wire. I'm going to say 34-27, Alabama. This has been Zach Harris for the Love of Sports preview of Sunday matchup between number 2 LSU and number 3 Alabama. Tune in Sunday at 11 a.m. on Fox Sports 980 and 95.9 FM. I will break down the game, who won, and where do they go from here, college football playoff rankings, and so much more.